Hi, this is Ken McCarthy, and we are back celebrating the 20th anniversary of the System Seminar. And yesterday and the day before, we talked about somebody really important in the history of Internet marketing named Corey Rudel. And tragically, he passed away at a very young age in 2005. Luckily, I did have a long conversation with him, which we put on tape, and it is available to all the people who are owners of the System Club Letters book. And I would say without any exaggeration that one interview alone is worth 10 times the price of the book. Corey was a giant. And this was me talking with him, quote, off the record, talking about what's real, what's not real, and what it really takes to make Internet businesses, or really any business, succeed. And if you don't know who Corey Rudel is, do a little bit of homework. If you know who he is, you realize what a giant he was. And we should really never forget this great guy who was the practical pioneer of so many things. For example, you ever heard of affiliate programs? He was doing them before Amazon. Yeah, that's how out there he was. He was a great, great guy. Anyway, we're reading from the System Club Letters, and I'm going to talk about another great guy who just happens to be in the book. This chapter is called In Memory of Ed McClain, 1927 to 2005. He was a crackerjack copywriter, one of the best that ever was, and certainly one of the most prolific, with over 9,000 mailings, print ads, radio spots, and publication inserts under his belt. He was an inspired educator, too. In 1967, he was the first person to design a college-level course for direct response copywriting and was one of the founders of the Direct Marketing Writers Guild, a group that helped countless fledgling copywriters get a toehold in the industry. And he was a great guy, generous, encouraging, intelligent, and independent. Ed McClain, selling the unsellable. If you're steeped in direct marketing lore, you've probably heard the story about the Mercedes diesel. Mercedes-Benz made a serious miscalculation about the number of 1967 era Americans who'd be interested in their diesel sedan. Big sellers in Europe, they were virtually unknown to American consumers, and the company was lucky to sell a few thousand a year. One year, someone sent way too many to the States, and Mercedes called David Ogilvy to help bail them out. Sidebar here, I keep mentioning David Ogilvy a lot. I hope you get some of his books. There aren't that many. They're easy to find. Ogilvy. Who did David Ogilvy call on to fix the point of the spear? That is, write the sales letter. He called on Ed McClain. And by the way, you will not learn that from reading anything that David Ogilvy ever wrote. I had to dig that little important detail out. The result, $3.5 million worth of these strange, noisy foreign cars were sold with a 6-page sales letter. Total sales cost, less than $100,000. Now, you may say, well, $3.5 million, that's not much. In 1967, you could have bought the world for $3.5 million. I mean, you can't imagine how much money even $1 million was in 1967. And just to give some people some perspective, in 1980, I was looking at 3-bedroom apartments on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Sales price, $120,000. You can't touch one of those things for less than $3 million now. All right, so that's the kind of inflation we had. That's since 1980. Ed made those sales in 67. So you always have to adjust when you see somebody's sales figures. You always have to adjust up. All right. The trick. What was the trick? How did he do it? The trick was giving buyers a creative rebate. In this case, a year's worth of diesel fuel. In those days, because diesel fuel was cheap and gasoline was cheap, in those days that amounted to $120 for 12,000 miles traveled. Small change for a car that sold for $4,000. Yes, there's been some inflation since 1967. Okay, that gives you a good indication. You could have bought a top of the line Mercedes-Benz brand new for $4,000 in 1967. I don't think you can buy a piece of junk used car today of any kind for that amount of money. So this was brilliant. This was brilliant. And notice in the sidebar, we're in sidebar territory here. Notice this was not fancy language. This was not NLP. This was not, superior psychological power. This was thinking. Thinking about, okay, how do we put some dazzle into this thing? These things are a dog. And how do we do it without spending a fortune? Hey, why don't we give people free gasoline for a year if they'll buy the car? Definitely catches people's attention. And even though free gasoline for a year only amounted to $120, talk about price inflation, that's like two loads that's like two gas tank fulls now, right? But in 1967, you could travel 12,000 miles on $120 of diesel fuel. How do you like that? So anyway, by giving away $120, they sold a $4,000 thing that was otherwise unsellable. So we call people like Ed McClain and people like Claude Hopkins, we call them copywriters. And they are copywriters because they write copy. But what they also do is they know how to think. This is the hardest thing to teach. It's the hardest thing to learn, but it is teachable and it is learnable. And someone's got to point it out to you that that's where the real money is made. Yeah, we can teach you everything about copywriting you need to know in about an hour or two. And if we spread it out over a day, better. We could probably make it last a couple of days and it would all be good. But nothing compares to being able to think like Claude Hopkins or to think like Robert Collier, or in this case to think like Ed McClain. Because a lot of the biggest business problems and the biggest business opportunities come not from brute strength or fancy footwork or writing brilliant ad copy. They come from thinking. I liken it to a Rubik's Cube. You've got a problem, and the problem is like an unfinished or an incomplete Rubik's Cube. If you don't know what a Rubik's Cube is, Google it and see it on YouTube. But basically, it was a super popular game, and it involved lining up colors in a square. You have to see it to understand it, and that's kind of what business problem solving is like. You're handed this mess, and nobody knows the answer. Nobody. If somebody knew the answer, you could just buy it. And sometimes you can buy the answer, and it makes a lot of sense to go out and consult with intelligent people. Believe me, you'll save weeks, months, years, decades off your life if you do that. But sometimes nobody has the answer, and you've got to come up with the answer. That's how we get paid. That's why entrepreneurs make money. That's why everybody else is punching a clock every day. So the entrepreneur is handed this mess, and he's got to sit there, and he or she, and sit there and tinker with it. Turn it this way, turn it that way, change this direction, push it, and you just keep working on it until suddenly everything lines up. And to me, that is one of the best descriptions of thinking that I know. Thinking involves gathering as much information as you possibly can, being open-minded, and letting nature take its course. If you really care about the solution to a problem and you have done truly exhaustive research and you've done your best to think it through rationally, almost 99 times out of 100, I would even say 999 times out of 1,000, you will come up with the answer. Now, it may come out of the blue. It may come in a dream. It could. This has happened in business. It may come as you're taking a shower. It may come as you're just walking down the street. Sometimes you can't, make the answer come. But what you can do is you can plow the field, and you can plant the seeds, and you can water it, and you can weed the field, and next thing you know, this brilliant idea jumps up, and it's amazing. And if you go back and read the Claude Hopkins book, or go back and read the Robert Collier book, and if you don't know what books I'm talking about, you got to go back and listen to some of the other calls. If you do these things, and Ed McClain obviously had the same methods. If you do these things, you do the prep work, and sometimes you have to be patient. Sometimes it may take weeks, sometimes it may take months. I've had business problems that I couldn't solve, and then several years later something popped into my head and the answer was there. And here's the weird thing. Invariably, they're simple. One of my favorite sayings is, intelligence is the sudden cessation ending, the sudden ending of stupidity. We're all dumb, We're all just clueless. We are. It helps to admit that, and we got to work and fight our way out of that. And invariably, when you come up with the answer, you're like, why didn't I see this before? There's another weird phenomenon is once you come up with one of these obvious answers, everybody will claim that it's no big deal. Nobody else was able to solve it for years or even decades, but once you put the answer on the table, then everybody knew. Oh, we all knew that. Well, not exactly. All right, back to Ed McClain. Great copywriter and great business thinker and great educator. Ed had the perfect background for writing direct response ad copy. He was in love with writing and was an aspiring novelist, like Eugene Schwartz, Dan Kennedy, and Mark Ford, to name a few. Yes, copywriting includes the act of writing, and writing is a craft. And if you're going to go into the field, may I strongly recommend that you be in love with writing. If you're not in love with writing, learn how to hire copywriters. Don't try to be one, because you won't have any fun. Unless you love writing, then you'll have big fun. So that was the first thing. He loved the work of writing. And he served as a door-to-door salesman. He served time as a door-to-door salesman. First selling pots and pans in New Orleans, and then baby photos in Brooklyn. Can you imagine that experience? Selling pots and pans? Have you ever been to New Orleans? Can you imagine going door to door in New Orleans selling pots and pans? Holy smokes. And selling baby photos in Brooklyn? And I'm not talking about the Brooklyn that we know now with all the avocado toast and all that stuff. Brooklyn used to be a hard-bitten place, as all of New York City used to be. And I can't even imagine going door to door there. But anyway, he did that. After being bit twice on the same ankle by two different dogs in a 2-week stretch, he decided to get off the street and get a real job. Hired by Newsweek at the age of 32, he hit the ball out of the park with the very first direct mail letter he ever wrote. It became Newsweek's control, ran for an incredible 17 years. And if you're a copywriter, you know that I just described the most amazing feat imaginable. It's like, hitting a grand slam home run in the bottom of the ninth on the 7th day of the World Series and turning it all around. I mean, it's one of those legendary things. And this letter was received by more than 150 million people, which was basically everybody in the United States at that time. The population of the United States has doubled since the 60s. So when he wrote that letter, pretty much every household in the United States got that letter. That's how powerful that letter was, because it worked. Okay, I remember Ed for his keen mind and generosity. He used to write a regular column for the DM News, and in exchange received a small ad that included his mailing address in Ghent, New York, coincidentally not far from where I live now. One day, when the idea of me ever succeeding in direct marketing seemed as remote as me flying to the moon, I took a chance and I wrote him a letter. Good thing email didn't exist back then. I wrote him a letter, a real letter, a thought-out letter. He wrote back! Exclamation point. And thus began a regular correspondence in the pre-email days. I can't tell you how much that meant to me at the time. David Ogilvy had a name for people like Ed McClain. Quote, gentleman with brains, end of quote. A great ad writer and a great guy. He'll be missed by many. And that was the great copywriter Ed McClain, 1927 to 2005. He did not write a book, but somewhere the direct marketing news must have an archive of everything he wrote. And if they were smart, they would just take all those columns, slap them into a book, and sell it, because I'm guarantee they would be of extremely valuable contribution to the world of direct marketing. All right, so that's our selection from the book, The System Club Letters, 57 Big Ideas to Transform Your Business and Life. See you next time.